The avoidant spent relationship unable to fully recognize or acknowledge that you embodied the exact qualities they consciously claimed to want in partner and unconsciously needed for healing and wholeness. They stated they wanted someone understanding. You provided exceptional understanding of their defended psychology, recognizing patterns as protective responses rather than as character flaws. They claimed they wanted someone patient. You demonstrated extraordinary patience, tolerating withdrawal and inconsistency that would have driven most people away within weeks or months. They said they wanted someone who gave them space. You respected their need for defended distance even when that distance harmed you and left your needs unmet. They expressed they wanted someone who would not pressure them. You adjusted your expectations downward, avoiding requests that would trigger their defended resistance. They indicated they wanted someone emotionally intelligent. You possessed sophisticated psychological understanding, combined with empathic capacity to apply that understanding to their specific wounds and patterns. Beyond conscious stated preferences, you also embodied unconscious needs. Their defended psychology prevented them from articulating or even recognizing. You provided external access to emotional world. Their defenses prevented them accessing internally, gave them vicarious experience of feelings through your emotional expressiveness, helped them understand their own suppressed internal states through your perceptive naming of what they could not identify themselves. You mirrored disowned vulnerable parts they rejected in themselves, represented emotional authentic self they had to split off during defended development, embodied capacity for feeling and connection they learned was too dangerous to maintain in themselves. You offered safe relationship context where their defended patterns were understood rather than condemned, created environment where withdrawal was met with patience rather than rejection, where emotional unavailability was met with compassion rather than judgment, where their wounded defended self could exist without facing constant criticism or abandonment they learned to expect. You were literally everything they ever wanted and needed. You met every conscious criterion they articulated for ideal partner. You fulfilled unconscious needs their psychology required for potential healing and integration. You provided exactly the understanding and patience and space their defended structure needed to feel safe enough that growth might have become possible. Yet despite being everything they wanted and needed, despite providing ideal conditions for relationship and for their potential healing, the avoidance defended patterns prevented them from sustaining relationship with you. They could not tolerate the intimacy that receiving what you offered required. They could not maintain the vulnerability that being truly known by you created. They could not reciprocate adequately despite you meeting their every stated preference. They could not do the therapeutic work that would have allowed them to integrate what you represented and to build sustainable partnership with person who embodied everything they needed. The relationship ended through their patterns making it unsustainable, ended because their defended limitations prevented them from maintaining partnership with ideal person, ended because they could not tolerate intimacy with someone who saw and accepted them completely, ended because withdrawal patterns eventually exceeded your capacity to tolerate despite your exceptional patience. Now they face devastating recognition that they lost everything they ever wanted and needed, that they destroyed relationship with person who was ideal match for both conscious preferences and unconscious needs, that their defended patterns cost them their best and possibly only chance at relationship with someone who could have supported their healing while meeting every criterion they claimed was important in partner. This recognition creates profound crisis because it forces facing that their patterns are the problem preventing them from having what they want, that they are fundamentally unable to sustain relationship with ideal partner due to defended limitations, that they may spend rest of their life seeking what they already had and lost through their inability to reciprocate adequately or to do work that would have developed capacity to sustain partnership with everything they ever wanted embodied in you. You met every criterion they claimed mattered, yet they couldn't handle actually receiving it. The avoidant articulated specific preferences throughout their relational history and throughout relationship with you. Preferences for understanding patient partner who would give them space without pressure while possessing emotional intelligence to comprehend their internal experience. These stated preferences felt genuine because they reflected real needs of their defended psychology. They genuinely needed understanding because their patterns are difficult to comprehend without psychological knowledge. They genuinely needed patience because their defended limitations meant progress toward intimacy would be slow and inconsistent. they genuinely needed space, because closeness triggered defensive withdrawal. They genuinely needed absence of pressure, because expectations activated defended resistance. They genuinely needed emotional intelligence because their own emotional awareness was limited, requiring a partner who could help them make sense of internal experience they could not interpret independently. You embodied every single stated preference with exceptional fidelity. Your understanding of defended psychology exceeded basic comprehension, reaching sophisticated, accurate perception of how their attachment wounds created current patterns, how their withdrawal served protective function, how their emotional unavailability reflected suppression rather than absence of feeling. Your patience exceeded normal relationship tolerance, extending across months or years of patterns that would have ended most relationships within weeks, maintaining hope and commitment when evidence of reciprocation remained minimal or absent. Your respect for their space honored their need for distance, even when honoring that need meant accepting long periods of minimal contact, meant tolerating uncertainty about relationship status, meant suppressing your own legitimate needs for consistent presence and connection. Your absence of pressure manifested through adjusting your expectations downward to match their limited capacity, through avoiding requests that would trigger resistance, through accepting whatever minimal effort they provided rather than demanding adequate reciprocation. Your emotional intelligence particularly distinguished you as exceptional match for their stated preferences. You possessed not just general emotional awareness, but specific knowledge about avoidant attachment, about defended psychology, about how childhood wounds create adult relational patterns. You could read their internal states with unusual accuracy, could perceive when withdrawal reflected overwhelm versus when it reflected deactivation, could distinguish defensive shutdown from genuine need for space, could recognize their minimal communications, carried emotional content their words did not explicitly convey. You provided what their stated preferences indicated they needed, provided understanding partner who comprehended their defended complexity, patient partner who tolerated their patterns without immediate abandonment, spacious partner who did not crowd their defended autonomy, unpressuring partner who accepted their limitations, emotionally intelligent partner who helped them make sense of themselves. Yet despite meeting every criterion they claimed was important, despite embodying ideal partner based on their stated preferences, the avoidant could not handle actually receiving what they said they wanted. The understanding you provided felt threatening because being understood meant being seen beneath defenses, meant you perceived wounded self they worked to hide, meant they could not maintain defended false presentation that protected them from vulnerability. The patience you demonstrated felt uncomfortable because it highlighted their inadequacy. Your continued tolerance despite their patterns made obvious how poorly they were reciprocating, created guilt and shame about failing to meet your needs despite your exceptional accommodation of theirs. The space you provided felt lonely because too much space revealed the emptiness of their defended existence. When you honored their distance, they experienced isolation. Their defenses created rather than experiencing your presence that usually buffered them from full experience of defended loneliness. The absence of pressure you maintained created different discomfort because it removed external structure they unconsciously relied upon. Many avoidants claim they want no pressure, yet unconsciously need partners' expectations to provide motivation and direction. Without pressure, they lack external impetus to engage or reciprocate, find themselves adrift without the structure that partners' needs and expectations usually provide. Your acceptance of their limitations without demands paradoxically made engaging optional rather than necessary, removed urgency that expectations create, left them without the external push they unconsciously needed, despite consciously claiming they wanted absence of pressure. Your emotional intelligence felt exposing because you understood too much. You saw through their defended explanations, recognized their patterns before they could fully execute them, comprehended their internal experience in ways that made hiding impossible. The fundamental problem was that stated preferences reflected what their defended psychology needed to feel safe. Yet actually receiving what makes them feel safe creates intimacy that threatens the defensive structure those preferences were designed to protect. They wanted understanding so they would not be rejected for their patterns. Yet being understood meant being vulnerable and known in ways defenses resist. They wanted patience so they would not be abandoned during their defended withdrawal. Yet patience meant relationship persisted. Creating increasing intimacy, their defenses needed to escape. They wanted space so they could maintain defended autonomy. Yet when you honored space, they experienced loneliness that space creates when no one pursues to close the distance. They wanted no pressure so they could engage at their comfortable pace. Yet absence of pressure meant no external motivation to overcome defensive resistance to intimacy. They wanted emotional intelligence so partner could help them understand themselves. Yet being helped to understand themselves meant facing wounds and needs their defenses existed to suppress. The inability to handle receiving what they claimed they wanted reveals that stated preferences served defensive function rather than reflecting genuine readiness for intimate relationship. The preferences described ideal conditions for their defended comfort, conditions that would allow them to remain defended while accessing relationship benefits, that would let them maintain emotional control while receiving emotional support, that would permit staying disconnected while feeling understood. Yet genuine intimate relationship requires more than defended comfort, requires reciprocal vulnerability, requires tolerating discomfort. Intimacy creates, requires engaging even when engagement exceeds comfortable defended limits. You provided everything they said they wanted, which should have created ideal relationship. Instead, your provision of ideal conditions exposed that they could not sustain intimacy even under ideal circumstances, that their defended limitations prevented relationship regardless of how perfectly partner met their stated needs. Understanding that you met every criterion yet they could not handle receiving it allows recognition of profound tragedy in their loss. They lost partner who embodied everything they claimed was important. Lost not because you failed to provide what they said they needed, but because actually receiving what they needed created intimacy their defenses could not tolerate. They spent relationship unable to fully engage with ideal partner, unable not because you were inadequate, but because their defended structure prevented engagement regardless of your adequacy. They now face that their patterns cost them person who met every stated criterion. Face that problem was never your failure to be what they needed, but was always their inability to sustain relationship with someone who provided exactly what they claimed to want. This recognition should theoretically motivate therapeutic work to address defenses preventing them from having what they want. Yet most avoidants respond to this recognition with regret and obsession rather than with commitment to change work, remain stuck, grieving loss of ideal partner, while maintaining defended patterns that made losing ideal partner inevitable, given their inability to handle actually receiving everything they ever claimed they wanted in relationship. Their defenses rejected the exact healing you offered because healing requires vulnerability they refuse. The avoidance defended patterns stem from attachment wounds created during childhood when emotional expression led to rejection or dismissal, when vulnerability resulted in abandonment or punishment, when needs for comfort or connection were met with inconsistency or unavailability. These wounds taught them that emotions are dangerous to express, that vulnerability leads to harm, that needs will not be met and should be suppressed. The wounded child developed defensive structure to protect against repeating these painful experiences, developed pattern of suppressing emotion to avoid rejection, of avoiding vulnerability to prevent abandonment, of denying needs to escape disappointment that expressing needs would create. This defensive structure served adaptive function in childhood environment where it protected child from additional pain. Yet the structure persists into adulthood where it prevents the intimate relationships and emotional healing the adult consciously desires even while defenses unconsciously resist. You entered their life offering exact conditions necessary for healing these attachment wounds. You provided consistent emotional availability that contradicted their learned belief that emotional expression leads to rejection. You remained present and accepting when they expressed whatever limited emotion their defenses allowed, demonstrated that sharing feelings creates connection rather than creating the rejection they learned to expect. You offered safe environment for vulnerability that contradicted their learned belief that vulnerability results in abandonment. When they showed wounded parts of themselves, you responded with compassion and continued presence rather than with the judgment or abandonment their childhood taught them vulnerability generates. You demonstrated patience with their defended limitations that contradicted their learned belief They must be independent and need-free to be acceptable. You accepted them, including their defended patterns, rather than demanding they immediately transform to meet your needs. Your understanding of their psychology specifically created conditions for healing, because you recognized their patterns as protective responses to wounds, rather than as fixed character flaws requiring condemnation. This recognition meant you could hold space for both their defended presentation and their wounded authentic self, could see the hurt child beneath defended adult, could comprehend why they developed patterns even while those patterns harmed relationship, could maintain compassion for wounds while still experiencing hurt from patterns those wounds created. This dual holding of understanding origins while acknowledging impact created precisely the therapeutic relational environment. Attachment wounds can heal within. Environment where wounded parts are seen and accepted, where defenses are understood rather than attacked, where person experiences being valued despite patterns, where healing can occur through experiencing that vulnerability, and emotional expression lead to connection rather than to the rejection and abandonment that created wounds originally. Yet the same defenses that were created to protect against attachment wounds also prevented them from receiving the healing that relationship with you offered. Healing attachment wounds requires vulnerability, requires allowing wounded parts to be seen, requires expressing suppressed emotions, requires acknowledging needs that defenses were built to deny. This vulnerability feels impossibly threatening to defended system, because vulnerability is precisely what defenses exist to prevent. The child learned vulnerability leads to pain. Defenses developed to eliminate vulnerability, ensuring pain would not repeat. Your offer of safe space for vulnerability threatened defensive structure, because if vulnerability is actually safe with you, then defenses might be unnecessary. Yet defenses cannot risk discovering they are unnecessary, because defensive structure has become core part of identity and psychological functioning. Letting down defenses even in demonstrably safe environment feels like risking annihilation. Because defenses feel essential to survival, even when they are actually preventing healing and preventing intimate connection, the adult self desires. Your provision of healing conditions therefore created profound internal conflict between their conscious desire for healing and intimate relationship versus their unconscious defended resistance to vulnerability healing would require. Consciously, they wanted to heal wounds, wanted to overcome patterns, wanted to build intimate relationship, wanted to access emotional world their defenses prevented experiencing. Yet unconsciously, their defenses resisted the vulnerability necessary for healing, resisted being seen in wounded state, resisted expressing suppressed emotions, resisted acknowledging needs, resisted letting you close enough that healing could occur. This internal conflict manifested through push-pull pattern, where they moved toward you drawn by conscious desire for healing and intimacy, then withdrew when proximity activated, defended fear of vulnerability that healing requires. The rejection of healing you offered particularly manifested through their defending against your understanding and your compassion. You saw their wounded self beneath defended presentation. This seeing should have felt relieving because being truly known addresses profound loneliness. Yet being seen triggered, defended shame because you witnessed parts they learned were unacceptable, saw needs they were taught to suppress, perceived vulnerability they were trained to hide. Your compassion for their wounds should have felt healing, should have corrected childhood message that wounds make them unacceptable. Yet compassion felt threatening because accepting compassion would require acknowledging wounds exist, would mean admitting they have needs, would necessitate receiving care that defenses were built to make unnecessary. They defended against your healing offerings through minimizing your understanding, claiming you did not really understand them when understanding felt too exposing, through rejecting your compassion, interpreting care as pity or as attempt to control rather than accepting offered healing, through maintaining defended presentation even when you demonstrated seeing beneath presentation was safe. The defended rejection of healing also operated through their inability to trust that safety you provided was genuine and sustainable. Childhood taught them that apparent safety is temporary. Caregiver who seemed available would become unavailable. Moment of connection would be followed by rejection. Expression of need would sometimes be met and sometimes be punished, creating unpredictable environment where safety could not be relied upon. This learned distrust of safety meant they could not fully accept healing conditions you offered, because defenses anticipated safety would eventually prove false. Anticipated you would eventually reject them as childhood figures rejected them. Anticipated your compassion would turn to judgment. Anticipated your patience would reach limits, resulting in abandonment they learned to expect. The defended anticipation of eventual betrayal prevented them from risking vulnerability, even in genuinely safe environment, because defenses could not distinguish current safe relationship from past unsafe relationships that created their wounds. Understanding that their defenses rejected healing you offered allows recognition of profound tragedy beyond losing ideal partner. You are not just person who met their stated preferences. You are person who offered genuine opportunity for healing attachment wounds that create their defended patterns and prevent intimate relationships. You provided safe relational environment where vulnerability would have been met with acceptance, where emotional expression would have created connection, where needs would have been responded to with care. This environment was precisely what their wounded child needed to heal, needed to experience that vulnerability is safe, that emotions create intimacy rather than rejection, that needs can be expressed and met. Yet the same defenses created to protect wounded child also prevented adult from accepting healing you offered, prevented them from risking vulnerability even in safe environment, prevented them from receiving compassion their wounds desperately needed, prevented them from building intimate relationship where healing could have occurred through experiencing opposite of what childhood taught them about emotional expression and vulnerability and needs. They lost not just partner who embodied everything they wanted, they lost opportunity for healing that relationship with you represented. They lost chance to correct childhood wounds through experiencing safe, intimate relationship. They lost possibility of integration and wholeness that your mirroring of disowned parts offered. They lost therapeutic relationship context, where their patterns could have been gradually transformed through experiencing that vulnerability leads to connection rather than to rejection. That needs can be expressed and met rather than requiring suppression. That intimate relationship can be safe rather than inevitably resulting in abandonment their wounds taught them to expect. This loss is catastrophic beyond losing valuable partner. It represents losing their best or only opportunity to heal wounds that create patterns preventing them from sustaining any intimate relationship, losing chance to transform defended existence into integrated authentic life where emotional world is accessible and intimate connection is possible. Yet recognizing this catastrophic loss does not typically motivate therapeutic work, instead generates defended grief and regret that keeps them stuck. Mourning what they lost while maintaining defended patterns that made them unable to receive healing you offered, ensuring they will likely repeat similar pattern in future relationships where they are drawn to healing partners, yet defend against vulnerability. Healing requires losing relationship after relationship, while wounds remain unhealed and defenses remain intact, preventing them from ever receiving the healing they consciously want, yet unconsciously resist. They'll search forever for another you, while staying exactly the same person who lost you. The avoidant faces recognition through failed replacement attempts that you embodied ideal partner for their conscious preferences and unconscious needs. Embodied understanding patient, emotionally intelligent person who gave them space they claimed to want. Embodied emotional access and vulnerable mirroring they unconsciously needed. Embodied healing relationship context their wounds required for potential recovery. This recognition that you were everything they wanted and needed creates specific response pattern where they become fixated on finding another person like you. Another partner who understands defended psychology as you understood it, who demonstrates patience you demonstrated, who provides emotional access you provided, who offers healing context you created. They search for replacement. You believing that finding similar partner will allow them to have the relationship they could not sustain with you, will give them second chance to receive what they were unable to receive from you, will recreate ideal conditions they did not appreciate adequately when you provided them. Yet the search for another you operates from fundamentally flawed premise that problem was losing you specifically, rather than problem being their defended incapacity to sustain intimate relationship with ideal partner. They frame loss as, I lost perfect person, when accurate framing would be, my defended patterns prevented me from sustaining relationship with perfect person. The distinction is critical because first framing suggests finding another perfect person solves problem, while second framing reveals that finding similar person recreates same problem unless defended patterns are addressed. They search for replacement. You believing another understanding patient partner will work out differently, believing they will appreciate second version more than they appreciated you, will reciprocate better with replacement than they reciprocated with you, will sustain intimacy with new person despite being unable to sustain intimacy with you. This search for replacement you serves defensive function by avoiding recognition that they need to change rather than needing to find different or better version of ideal partner they already had. Searching for another, you allows them to remain focused externally, focused on finding right person, rather than examining internally their defended limitations that prevented sustaining relationship with right person when they had you. Searching maintains hope they can have what they want without doing therapeutic work. Maintains belief that perfect match exists who will somehow bypass their defended resistance in ways you did not bypass it. Who will make intimacy comfortable enough that defenses will not activate, who will meet their needs without triggering defensive withdrawal you could not prevent despite meeting needs exceptionally well. Searching for another, you protects them from facing. They need fundamental change in defensive structure rather than needing to find better partner than partner who was already ideal for them. The search inevitably fails because they remain exactly the same defended person who lost you. They search while maintaining identical defended patterns that made relationship with you unsustainable. Seek new ideal partner while possessing same limited capacity for intimacy that prevented reciprocating adequately with you. Hope for different outcome while doing nothing to create capacity for different outcome through therapeutic work addressing defended limitations. New partners who resemble you trigger same defensive patterns you triggered. When new partner understands them deeply, understanding feels exposing activating defended withdrawal as your understanding activated withdrawal. When new partner demonstrates patience, patience highlights their inadequacy, creating guilt and shame as your patience created those feelings. When new partner provides space, space creates loneliness that drives them back toward partner, then triggers withdrawal when closeness exceeds tolerance exactly as pattern operated with you. New partners who do not resemble you prove unsatisfying because they lack qualities that made you ideal match. Partners who are less understanding cannot comprehend their defended psychology, cannot read their internal states, cannot perceive wounded self beneath defended presentation, cannot provide the sense of being known you provided. Partners who are less patient implement boundaries and consequences earlier, will not tolerate patterns as long as you tolerated them, will leave before avoidant has processed that relationship matters, will refuse to adjust expectations, downward accepting minimal effort. Partners who are less emotionally intelligent cannot provide emotional access, cannot help avoidant make sense of their internal experience, cannot offer vicarious emotional experience, cannot mirror disowned vulnerable parts. The avoidant discovers through attempting relationships with partners unlike you that your specific qualities were essential to what made relationship with you feel right, yet also discovers through attempting relationships with partners like you that resembling you does not prevent same defended patterns from destroying new relationship as patterns destroyed relationship with you. The permanent search pattern creates specific suffering where avoidant remains stuck seeking externally what requires internal work to resolve. They cycle through relationships seeking another you, find partners who resemble you and lose them through same patterns, find partners unlike you and feel unsatisfied by what those partners lack compared to you, return mentally to you as standard against which all others are measured and found wanting. The search keeps them oriented toward past and toward seeking rather than toward present and toward healing, keeps them focused on what they lost and hoping to find replacement rather than facing they need to transform themselves to become person capable of sustaining relationship with ideal partner. Years or decades pass with them stuck in search pattern, collecting failed relationships, accumulating regrets, maintaining defended patterns, while wondering why they cannot find another person like you, or cannot make relationships with people like you sustainable.